Today we are looking at this jar. It's not just any old jar, oh no. This is the jar that houses the biggest closed terrarium I've ever made, up until this point, that is. I made it 4.5 years ago, at the time of filming, meaning this ecosystem has been closed and completely isolated from the rest of the inhabitants of Earth for 4.5 years. You might be wondering, why not just wait half a year so you can update us at the 5-year mark, a much more satisfying number? Well, because lately something interesting has been going on. But to understand, first we have to go back in time to see how this ecosystem came to be and how it fared over the years. It all started with collecting some soil and plants, as well as some decorations, charcoal and various critters from outside. All collected on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the 29th of April 2021. Not just on a rainy day, but from a very wet area in general. This would come in handy, as I know from experience that getting the moisture levels right in such closed ecosystems is very difficult. And more moist environments with organisms adapted to those conditions are the most forgiving. With all the collecting done, it was time to go to sleep. The next day I saw some cool species on the bark, a spider in a cocoon and the common striped woodlouse, or fast woodlouse. I used this pretty 10-liter jar to house the ecosystem. I made a drainage layer from clay pebbles, added the charcoal on top of it to hopefully somewhat filter the water, did not add any mesh because I didn't have one and thought I'd get away with it, added the freshly harvested soil, tried to do some landscaping but without much success, though as I said before I always prefer biologically interesting ecosystems over aesthetically pleasing ones, which is something you have to tell yourself if you're not great at land and aquascaping. I added some soil with plants already growing out of it, some other plants, decorative stones, bits of grass, while being delighted to find an earthworm and a millipede. Then I added some creeping Charlie, which you might remember from the paludarium ecosphere, as well as this native succulus plant, Sedum acre. Lastly, I threw some sticks in there, because you gotta have sticks, and to finish it all off I abducted some isopods, rough woodlice, which go by many names, as you can see in this video. So before this jar was closed, what animals were living in it? Well, some of them could have left the jar prior to it becoming a closed ecosystem, but there was a harvestman, an extremely well camouflaged jumping spider, a centipede, 3 species of isopod, this one Porcelius scabber, the rough woodlouse, as well as the common striped woodlouse, and the roly-poly. Those last two I didn't actually see, but I know I put them in there, although again they could have left. I saw this springtail, and chances are there's quite a few species in here. Together with the isopods, they will eat decaying plant matter and keep the fungi in check, an important role in the ecosystem. The springtails especially may also serve as food for any predators. Representing the mollusks is the white-lipped garden snail, Sepia hortensis. Those were the starting conditions for this ecosystem. At this point it still looked quite pretty, and I left it open for a few days to let some moisture evaporate, because it was a little wet from all the rain. This led me to the discovery that the snail likes to rest and poop in the lid of the jar. I don't advise doing those things in the same place, but to each their own, I guess. The striped woodlice did show themselves after all, probably because they still found the soil to be a bit too wet at this point. The springtails were making a lot of bebes, and there were nematodes in the moisture on the glass as well. It's a good thing that there were more of these tiny jumping hexapods now, because like I said earlier, they are great at eating dead plant material. And in the 3 weeks at this point since the terrarium was made, there has been a lot of plant growth. The creeping Charlie, the plant with the big round leaves, is doing exceptionally well, spreading throughout the entire jar. The sedum grew a lot and was actually flowering, and the same is true for the grass, which has also spread throughout the entire jar. some clover started growing as well, probably from a little plant material in the soil, hopefully a good omen. The increased plant growth also left a mark in the soil, with loads of root growth, and there were even some plants growing underground. There was also a lot of pretty fungi growth, especially on the big stick. The animals in this ecosystem don't show themselves often, as most live in or on the soil and between the sticks, rocks and bark and the soil. But here we could see the millipede, and as it turned out there was a rove beetle in there too, which at this point would be the apex predator in the ecosystem, with a jumping spider, if it hasn't left the jar at this point, which it probably has, and the centipede being the other large predators. And that was the state of our ecosystem 1.5 months after it was made, a closed eternal terrarium at this point, with very lush plant growth and quite pretty at this time. Five months later, it was fall, which caused the amount of plants to go down. The creeping Charlie, being a plant that loves the shade, managed to remain quite prominently represented, while most other plants went extinct. These fully airtight jars proved to be harsh environments for plants time and time again. The snail had grown quite a bit, and the common rough woodlice were making a lot of cute bebe isopods, resulting in a rapidly growing population, which is good because they could deal with the increasing amount of dead plant matter, together with the springtails. Another year later, it was the same story, a relatively large population of these isopods eating a relatively large amount of dead plant matter. It's unfortunate that at this point in my life I wasn't able to do much for life in jars or pay close attention to my projects. It would have been really interesting to also have footage from the other seasons and more frequent updates in general. Not much we can do about that now, but luckily things did improve. 1.5 years later, when the ecosystem was about 3 years old and had been closed for almost 3 years, it looked like this. You'll notice that visually not much has changed in 2.5 years. That is quite interesting and also quite unique for a closed ecosystem in my experience, especially because this visual stability occurred so early in the lifespan of this ecosystem. Although I must say that this was filmed right at the start of spring, so again quite similar conditions, with not a lot of light yet. That doesn't change the fact, however, that the creeping Charlie is the dominant plant species and is doing well, and is also producing, albeit indirectly, a lot of rotting plant material, especially on the glass. Any leaves that grow against the wet glass end up dying because they can't really deal with being wet. And that's great news for many of the animal inhabitants that are in this ecosystem, because a lot of them are detritivores and use decaying plant matter as a food source, like these cute globular springtails. These tiny dark hexapods were really abundant by now, but we didn't really see much of these earlier. Interestingly, the springtail composition in this jar shifted from being dominated by light, elongated springtails, which were quite a bit larger, to these tiny dark globular ones. Maybe these are simply better adapted to these kinds of conditions. They are the same species, or at least a very similar one, as the ones that are now also dominating the fruit fly jar. Pretty cool, right? Another detritivorous species is the rough woodlouse, which has maintained a large population in these 3 years, and another one is this millipede. Then there are these white wiggly nematodes. We saw different, smaller nematodes earlier, and now there's quite a lot of these larger ones, which most likely are also detritivores. The isopod population by now is, quite simply put, large. They've been able to reproduce steadily in this relatively stable environment over the years. The same is actually true for the millipedes as well. I only deliberately put one of them in the jar, but now there are more. They have been reproducing for sure. Look, I even saw a bebe. That means that there were more than one in the jar, perhaps hidden in the soil or a piece of bark, or there were eggs present in the soil. Regardless, their numbers are growing, possibly as a result of increased food availability and/or a lack of predators. That's what the closed terrarium looked like after 3 years. Luckily, the entire ecosystem doesn't rely solely on the creeping Charlie. There's also some moss still growing, and there's algae in the soil as well. We didn't see all the animals that we saw before, but that doesn't necessarily mean they weren't there anymore, because a lot of them are burying species. But so far, this all wasn't new information for the loyal viewers of the channel. By now, the ecosystem is 1.5 times older, so how is it doing now? We'll take a look at that shortly, but first I want to talk about something strange that's been happening for the past 8 months or something. The first time I managed to capture it on camera was March 2025. Did you manage to spot it? There was something flying in the terrarium, and it's sitting right here on the glass, though you'll only see it now as it flies away again. Now, for a while I thought I was going crazy, because I thought I saw something moving in the air of the jar, but as soon as I looked closer, and especially if I also grabbed my camera, there was nothing to be seen. Over the months, I frantically tried to film it every time I saw it, and it turns out I'm not actually crazy. Well, this part at least. So it appears that, after almost 4 years, suddenly a new species has appeared in this jar. Of course, it didn't materialize out of thin air, but must have been present in the ecosystem in some form from the very start. These flying animals appear to be fungus gnats, a collective name given to 6 families of flies, together comprising thousands or even tens of thousands of species. Almost all of them have something in common though, as the name suggests, they, and particularly their larvae, really like fungi. As we've seen, there are definitely fungi in this ecosystem, many of which are probably decomposing dead plant matter. So why did it take such a long time for them to appear? Well, there's of course always the possibility, however unlikely, that they've flown around in here from the start, and by pure chance I always missed them. More realistically, maybe, is that there were dormant eggs in the soil. I have no clue which species this is, and most species of which it is known don't lay eggs that can survive dormant for years, but it still may be a possibility. Okay, yeah, so I don't really know. They also seem to have increased in numbers over the last few months, which is very interesting. Whatever's going on, it is clear that the conditions in this ecosystem for this fly are quite good at the moment. Well, except maybe for this particular individual, which took being a fungus gnat a bit too literally. Though the fuzzy fungus sphere around its decaying body appears to be a popular location for another fungophile, these little springtails. And there's even a nematode crawling around. With so much going on in such a small little world behind glass, it's sometimes difficult not to get distracted. The springtails keep their eye on the prize, however, and are happily feasting on the decomposers of this dead insect. And it seems to really be the fungus and not the fly itself the springtails like. Here's another dead fly, a rather fresh one, and it is not surrounded by our little hexapodal friends. But there's one over here. Oh, and one over here, and hey, another one over here, and oh, sorry, I shouldn't get distracted. We were talking about the fungus gnats. It's just, look at them. So small and round, and with their cute little antennae. Oh, it happened again. Quick, I gotta look at something different. Wow, look at those legs. Quite a sight to behold. There, I'm getting calmer again. Millipedes always help me reconnect with myself, They always have their feet planted firmly on the ground. And they have a lot of them. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's move on. Another critter with a lot of feet is this one, the common rough woodlouse. Porcellio scabber, also known as tomato bugs, chuggy pegs, crunchy bats, billy buttons, parson pigs, chicky pigs, chuggy pigs and chiggywigs, just to give you a small impression of their impressive collection of names. These little guys are the most important cleaners of this closed terrarium, as they eat more decaying organic matter than both the millipedes, because there are less of those, and then the springtails, because those are just so teeny tiny whiny itty bitty and little whittle. And they'll go anywhere to find food, climbing up the plants and back, and even walking on the glass, to feed on whatever is decaying or growing there. They don't eat solely dead stuff. I find it really impressive how they are able to walk on the glass like that, against gravity. You'll never see him fall off. Oh, well, that was quite a tumble, but before it fell you could see it eating something on the glass. Pretty cool. See, this little isopod is just fine. You know, they can just walk this sort of stuff off, because they have a lot of legs. Okay, I'm sorry. Wait, I think I got sidetracked again. I was going to tell you how the ecosystem's doing now, right after I introduced the flies. Well, this is what the jar looks like nowadays. Not really different from the last few months, because it's quite stable. The creeping Charlie has become the dominant and, well, the only plant in this ecosystem. That is actually a trait of creeping Charlie, Glaucoma heteracea. It grows extensive root systems, often outcompeting other plants, and it is very hardy. Because of this, it has become an invasive species in certain places in North America, originally only being present in Europe. Furthermore, it is suggested by some that creeping Charlie produces allelochemicals, compounds that inhibit the growth of other organisms, like plants. Although as far as I could quickly find, the scientific evidence for this is not really conclusive. So it's no surprise it's doing well, and maybe the other plants didn't die because they couldn't survive in these conditions, but because they couldn't survive the creeping Charlie. So maybe it actually isn't an ideal candidate for a closed ecosystem. On the other hand, it has always survived, also in other projects, so yeah. Especially the side that's usually facing the window has a lot of plant growth. Even though there's no other plants left, not even the moss that was growing in the jar until quite recently, there are still other primary producers. In this very wet side of the glass jar we can see that there is some sort of green slime present. This slime is filled with, or even made from, algae, and these slime blobs therefore have a similar function to that of the plants, taking up carbon dioxide and producing oxygen and sugars, using light. We actually saw the same thing in the fruit fly jar. This might be a bit difficult to see, but there's also algae growing next to the glass underground. The soil there has a bit of a green color. We've seen them before, but here they are again, the fungus gnats. Like I said, they've been increasing in numbers during the past months, and that trend has continued. Look, by now we can see 4 of them walking on the glass simultaneously, where before I saw one flying every few days or even weeks. Here you can see them even closer. Unfortunately, just before I dusted off the jar for filming, although you do get a bit of a better sense of what they look like and how many there are. And with a significant increase in flies comes a significant increase in dead flies. Here alone there's 6 next to each other. The springtail doesn't know what to make of it. Here's 2 more, or 3 even, in various stages of decomposition. On a lot of spots on the glass we can now find the remains of these fungus gnats, which will have to be cleaned up by the springtails, isopods, nematodes and microbes. I'm sure they'll figure it out. Here we have a bit of a closer, cleaner look at some of the flies. I'm assuming they're all the same species. If they're not, the mystery of how they suddenly got so abundant would become much greater. Like I said, there are 6 families composing the fungus gnats. I tried to visually identify what this fly could be. I think it's most likely a fly of the family Sciaridae, Ditomiidae or Mesetophilidae, though I'm not really sure. And that would hardly narrow it down anyway. These flies are very funny to look at. They're not the best flyers and they prefer to walk, something they're quite good at. Just look at that speed. They're pretty goofy. You know what else is goofy? Millipedes. Here we have a young individual. In the previous update I told you how I thought this species might be Omatoiulis sabulosus. I now think it's Brachyolus pusillus. That is because this is the first time I can take a good look at its butt. You see, Omatoiulus sabulosus, the striped millipede, has a pointy rear, while Brachyolus pusillus, which doesn't have a common name in English, but which I'll call the small striped millipede, loosely translating its Dutch name, has a round rear, a bubble butt. An interesting fact about the large striped millipede is that it takes 3 years for them to reach sexual maturity. But unfortunately I couldn't find any similar information for the small striped millipede. A different interesting fact though is that they're often found in walls. This one seems to be gliding more than walking on the glass. Almost like it's moonwalking, which is really impressive because it has a lot of legs. Alright. Unfortunately, this jar doesn't seem to want to show me much of its animal life today. That's not really surprising though, as many of the inhabitants that were in here at the start of the experiment are burrowing species, or at the least ones that like to hide. However, we've seen the isopods, millipedes and springtails, and even the fungus gnats, which weren't even there at the start of the experiment, at least not the way they are now. Any of the critters we haven't seen might still very well be here too. And maybe it's okay to not always take too close a look at a project and leave some videos a bit shorter. Though I do realize I'm saying this before editing, so who knows how long this one will turn out to be. And I can always take another look, of course. For now, this is the closed big terrarium, which has been an airtight, self-sufficient ecosystem for the last 4.5 years. The plants and algae are providing the animals and aerobic microbes with oxygen, while getting carbon dioxide in return. They're growing and dying, providing the herbivores and detritivores and various fungi with food. Meanwhile, the animals and aerobic microbes are providing the plants with the carbon dioxide and turning the dead organic matter, with the help of demineralizing microbes, into nutrients the plants and algae can use, closing the loop. How wonderful! Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching and good fly!